It never occurred to her that a simple plumbing call would turn into her worst nightmare. She was easy prey for the Stormrunner's motorcycle gang, simply another girl from a little town they could intimidate. Their vicious reputation made her heart accelerate as they circled her like wolves, leather cuts shining in the sunlight. However, they committed one deadly error. They were going to discover why some men can afford to be kind because they are aware of how dangerous they truly are. They were unaware that her peaceful, modest father, the most trusted plumber in Crystal Lake, was a highly skilled Navy SEAL. A brief silence before we go on. Please let us know where you are watching from. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're liking these stories, as tomorrow's episode is going to be incredible. Steele's Plumbing stood as a tribute to integrity and dependability across Main Street and Crystal Lake, where the rising sun cast long shadows. Ethan Steele's attention to detail was evident in the weathered brick structure's immaculate windows and recently painted blue trim. Samantha Steele, lacking in practice, shuffled service tickets inside while the soft murmur of talk radio filled the room. With a worried expression on her normally calm face, Mrs. Weber rushed in as the brass bell above the door chimed. As she walked to the counter, her hands twisted the strap of her handbag. Even though it was a clear morning, water trickled from her coat. "I'm glad you're open, Samantha. My basement is a complete mess. The water is rising and ankle deep." Mrs. Weber's tone faltered a little. Since Samantha was a young girl learning to thread her first pipe, she had been a regular customer for 15 years. Samantha moved quickly but never hurriedly, immediately reaching for her equipment. "Mrs. Weber, I'll be right over. I can manage this even though Dad is at the Miller job across town." You could feel the old woman's relief. "Like your father, sweetheart, you are a blessing." Samantha went outside and packed her tools into the immaculate white service van, making sure that every tool had its proper position. Just as Ethan had taught her everything else about the job, he had also taught her this precision. Every fitting, pipe, and tool had a specific function and location. She drove by the familiar sights of Crystal Lake on her way to the Weber residence. Mike Davidson's favorite parts were always available at the hardware shop. The greatest coffee in 3 counties was served at the cafe where Nina Rodriguez worked. Dr. Amanda Foster's office, where she treated everything from seasonal flu to skinned knees. Reputation was based on trust and upheld by dependability in this community where everyone knew one another. Samantha's palm tightened slightly on the steering wheel when she heard the first rumbling of motorcycles, which was far away and hardly perceptible. In neighboring towns, the Thunderwolves MC had been making their presence known. 3 companies had already agreed to be protected in Laurel Creek. Although they hadn't visited Crystal Lake, Summit City Police had observed an uptick in gang activity. Not quite yet. Mrs. Weber was virtually bouncing with nervousness as she waited by her front door. "Samantha, it's getting worse. I hear horrible sounds coming from the pipes." Samantha followed the old woman inside after grabbing her tool bag. The issue was instantly obvious as the cellar steps groaned beneath their feet. Water was splattering on the concrete floor from a broken main line. "Mrs. Weber, don't worry. I'll have this resolved quickly." Her father's quiet confidence was evident in Samantha's speech. Already, she was assessing the issue and mentally listing the necessary fixes. Several motorcycles could be heard as the motors grew louder. They walked carefully and purposefully past Mrs. Weber's house. Samantha saw flashes of the Stormrunner symbol through the cellar glass, a lightning bolt piercing storm clouds and leather cuts. Mrs. Weber's face went a little white. "All morning, they have been cycling across town. I've never seen them here." Samantha started the repair with steady hands and a laser-like focus. "Mrs. Weber, don't worry, they're probably only passing by." But she was wiser. No place was ever simply traversed by the Thunderwolves. They themselves resembled storm clouds. They assembled, they constructed, and then they disintegrated. Her cell rang. Her father texted her. "Is everything all right?" There was something eerily sinister about Ethan Steele. Samantha had never understood how he always seemed to sense when something wasn't right throughout her 23 years. It was developed over years of, well, she wasn't meant to know about those years, and was like a sixth sense. Ethan Steele was merely a plumber to everyone in Crystal Lake. A decent one. Actually, the greatest. Dependable, truthful, and quietly strong without ever having to show it. All okay, Dad. Just repairing the leak in Mrs. Weber's basement. Thunderwolves passed. He answered in a flash. Complete the task and return to the shop. I'll be there shortly. As Samantha finished the repair, the pipes creaked and the sound of running water eventually stopped. She was doing one last check of her work as a slower rumble of motorcycles went by. Mrs. Weber nervously wrung her hands. Perhaps you ought to hold off until they're gone, my love. Samantha gave a comforting grin. Mrs. Weber, it's daylight. Furthermore, our entire town cannot be disrupted by a few motorcycles. However, Samantha recalled further lessons she had learned from her father as she packed away her equipment. Things that went beyond installing water heaters and connecting pipes. How to pay attention to your environment. How to recognize possible dangers. How to be confident and attentive at the same time. It's the sort of information a plumber's daughter might not require. There was a comforting purr when the van began up. Samantha saw two motorcyclists turn onto Mrs. Weber's street through the rearview mirror. Like predators, they were marking their territory, taking their time, and observing the area. Their leather cuts shone in the early morning light, patches indicating their loyalty to the commander of the Thunderwolves. Samantha kept her speed constant as she moved away from the curb. Don't move too quickly, as that would convey dread. Don't be too slow because that might draw notice. Just the typical speed at which a person goes about their daily activities. Although she had never asked why a plumber would know such things, her father had taught her another lesson. After 2 blocks of following her, the bikers began to split off, their engines roaring like distant thunder. Maybe a warning. Or a pledge. Ethan Steele was already waiting back at the business. In his spotless work clothes, he stood behind the counter with a laid-back demeanor and keen eyes. Samantha got another quality from him, and those eyes saw it all. All fixed up in Mrs. Weber's basement. His voice was kind as usual as he inquired. Everything is ready. Mainline cracked, but I noticed it before it caused any significant harm. Samantha started loading her van again, putting each tool back where it belonged. Our settlement appears to be of interest to the Thunderwolves. With a contemplative gaze, Ethan nodded slowly. They had been circling his hardware store this morning, Mike Davidson said. Nina claimed that they made everyone uncomfortable during their hour-long stay in the diner. Do we need to worry? Something sparked in her father's eyes, but his grin was soft. Something not appropriate for a plumber from a tiny town. Not yet, but being ready is always a good idea. Officer David Cooper entered, his outfit immaculate in spite of the late morning heat, and the bell rung once again. Steele, good morning. Samantha. He gave them each a nod. I wanted to let you know that Thunderwolves have been inquiring about nearby companies. They seem to be especially interested in family-run businesses. Ethan's stance changed somewhat, but his expression remained the same. Samantha noticed something that most others would not. It was the same change she had witnessed when he was getting ready to take on a particularly difficult task, a quiet preparation, a collection of materials. Thanks, David, for the heads up. We'll continue to watch. Routine maintenance tasks and service calls occupied the rest of the day. But in Crystal Lake, something had changed. Like the atmosphere before a storm, the air felt heavier and more charged with possibility. Samantha watched her father carefully inspect the shop's locks as nighttime drew near. Like everything else he did, he moved with economy and precision. However, they carried an additional burden of purpose tonight. Dad? She began, but he appeared to understand her question. Peace isn't always about staying out of trouble, Samantha. It all comes down to being prepared. His eyes were serious as he turned to look at her. Additionally, you don't always want to provoke the kindest individuals. The sky turned orange and purple as the sun sank over Crystal Lake. On the horizon, however, were heavier clouds, and the distant roar of motorcycles seemed like rolling thunder through the still streets. The Steele family was going to be at the center of a storm that was headed toward Crystal Lake. As Samantha pushed through the door with her toolbox full of necessities for the morning, the bell of the hardware store rung. There has always been more than just a supply stop at Mike Davidson's property. The working folks of Crystal Lake congregated there to exchange news and sort out issues. Today, however, there was an uncomfortable quiet in place of the customary amiable banter. Mike's generally happy smile was tense as he stood behind the counter. With their leather cuts identifying them as Steve Dragon Morrison and Ray Cobra Peters, two Thunderwolves members were lounging against the paint display. They weren't going shopping. They waited. Samantha called out, "Good morning, Mike," consciously ignoring the motorcycle riders as she made her way to the plumbing supplies. "Copper fittings must be stocked up on." Mike smiled strangely in response. "Samantha, I just received a new shipment yesterday. You are aware of their location." The motorcyclist straightened as she proceeded down the aisle, their boots weighing heavily on the weathered wooden floor. Cobra held his ground, essentially boxing her in, while Dragon followed a purposefully careless route that would cross hers. "Look what we got here," Dragon said with a tone of feigned amazement. "The woman plumber who has been the talk of the town." Samantha kept looking at the clothes. She moved slowly. Her father also taught her to never show your perspiration to others. Talking about half-inch compression fittings isn't particularly engaging. She answered in a businesslike tone. "Sweetheart, it's not the fittings we've been hearing about." With a creaking leather cut, Dragon stepped closer. "It has been reported that you are the top pipe fitter in 3 counties. Is that accurate? You can contact our company if you require plumbing services. We'll schedule a suitable time." She carefully picked out a few fittings and added them to her basket. Through the surveillance mirror of the store, the bell rung once more. Samantha saw Marcus Maverick Reynolds walk in, his presence blocking out the sun like storm clouds in the tiny room. The leader of the Stormrunners glided with a predatory ease, his calculating eyes and scarred face identifying him as someone who was accustomed to being feared. Maverick's voice was unexpectedly smooth, "Miss Steele. It was exactly someone I wanted to meet." Cobra moved slightly as Mike began to go around the counter. The owner of the hardware store gave a subdued caution, his face a mask of irritated worry. In keeping with her professional manner, which was as much armor as the leather of the Stormrunners, Samantha turned slowly. "What can Steele Plumbing do for you today, Mr. Reynolds?" Maverick's smile fell short of his eyes. "Knowing who I am makes this easier, smart girl." He waved in the direction of the shop. "We want to build some business contacts because we're new to the area. The reputation of your father. In Crystal Lake, it is significant. Any plumbing issues are always welcome to be handled by us. I'm not talking about that type of business." Samantha had to look up to meet Maverick's eyes as he drew nearer. Crystal Lake is a pleasant, quiet village. Peace requires protection at times. Maverick stretched out to touch a shelf nearby, his rings catching the early sun shining through the store windows. Windows break, pipes burst, accidents occur. Astute entrepreneurs take preventative measures. "Mr. Reynolds, is that threatening?" "Just a cordial business conversation." He grinned a little more. "Perhaps you ought to discuss it with your father. Assist him in comprehending how the modern world functions." The entrance of the business chimed once again. In spite of the early service call he had been attending to, Ethan Steele was standing in the doorway in spotless work clothes. Despite his gentle demeanor, Dragon and Cobra felt uneasy about his posture. "Samantha, is everything all right here?" Although Ethan's voice was friendly as usual, Samantha had never noticed the undercurrent before. "All okay, Dad." Mr. Reynolds was showing interest in what we could do. With deliberate, measured steps, Ethan entered the store without hurry. He moved to stand next to his daughter, and even though Maverick was taller, the gang leader took a slight step back when he saw Ethan. Ethan replied in a low voice, "Welcome to Crystal Lake. I am aware that you have been visiting a lot of local establishments." Maverick bounced back fast, his grin hardening. "Simply getting to know the neighborhood and being a good neighbor." Ethan retorted, "Crystal Lake handles things its own way." He spoke in a casual tone, but he never took his eyes from Maverick's face. "It has been quiet here for a while. That's how we want it to remain." Peace, Maverick thought. Isn't it a delicate thing? It's simple to break. Similar to pipes. Similar to bones. Although Ethan's smile remained unwavering, his demeanor changed. It was mild, a slight shift in equilibrium. The way he held his shoulders changed slightly. While most would not notice, Maverick did. For a brief period, the gang leader's confidence wavered. Ethan added quietly, "Some things that appear fragile aren't fragile at all. Steel that is hidden from view supports some objects." In the store, the tension grew. As they waited for a signal, Dragon and Cobra turned to face their boss. Mike Davidson watched the situation unfold from behind his counter, motionless. Maverick finally broke the silence with a laugh. "Mr. Steele, just a nice visit." He motioned to his men that there was no need for philosophical debates. "I hope to see you both again soon." With their boots heavy on the wooden floor, the Thunderwolves filed out. Maverick glanced back out the window as they mounted their bikes. Something flashed between them, maybe a warning or a recognition, as his eyes locked with Ethan's. As the motorcycles withdrew, their boom receding, they roared to life. It was only then that Mike drew a trembling breath. With renewed vigor, Shadow examined Ethan. "And then," he said, "you're different. How you watch and how you move. You're not a plumber alone. There is more to everyone than meets the eye." Ethan's tone stayed soft. "Stormrunners, too." Shadow's hand gripped his sliced zipper more tightly. "Maverick is pushing too quickly and too hard. It's different in this town. Are the people here still honorable?" Quietly, Ethan proposed. The word struck Shadow like a blow to the body. "Honor," he said quietly again. "I haven't heard that word imply anything in a long time. But it means something to you. You wouldn't be here by yourself, witnessing a church gathering concerning the harm your brothers inflicted." Samantha moved intentionally quietly so that every word could be heard clearly as she went slowly through their chat. She recognized her father's gesture of reaching out and giving a drowning man a line. Shadow warned that things would grow worse. Maverick has plans. Crystal Lake is only the beginning. The entire corridor between here and Summit City is what he wants to dominate. And your club's other veterans? They're in favor of this? Shadow's quiet response was sufficient. More motorcycles came up outside. His head jerked up, his body tensing up again. He hurried to the door and said, "I was never here." However, he stopped and turned to face Ethan. "Marines?" Ethan grinned a little. "Navy?" Before he vanished into the night, Shadow's eyes briefly flashed with something like recognition. Ray Cobra Peters and Steve Dragon Morrison roared past a moment later, either oblivious to or missing their brother. "Dad?" As she tightened the final fitting, Samantha asked softly. "What just took place?" Ethan responded, testing the fix, "We discovered a crack in their foundation. Remember, pressure doesn't just break things. Sometimes we can use the weaknesses it reveals." As they were wrapping up, Officer Cooper pulled up with the lights off in his police cruiser. "Ethan has some important news to share." The Summit City chapter of Thunderwolves is requesting reinforcements. It's massive, whatever they're planning. Ethan gave an unsurprised nod. It will be their intention to set an example. Everyone should see what occurs when a town doesn't comply. Mike advised that we leave. Shut down the store until... No. There was a gentle authority in Ethan's voice. That's their goal. Fear destroying our communities and emptying our streets. Crystal Lake is not operational. In the faint light, Samantha saw her father's features. She had never seen anything like that before. Planning maneuvers and countermoves demonstrates a strategic mindset in action. David? Ethan spoke to the officer. What is the number of veterans in Crystal Lake? About a dozen. Why? Perhaps it's time for a new type of community gathering. One that serves as a reminder that strength is more than just the ability to do the most harm. Samantha saw more bikers going by as they packed their tools into the vehicle. Their riders are observing. The Thunderwolves were encircling Crystal Lake with their net. However, they were unaware of the true threat they posed. They spotted a peaceful town. A simple target. The steel beneath the surface was unknown to them. The power that didn't require self-promotion. They were unaware of the fact that gentlemen can occasionally be the most dangerous. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this narrative. Please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It is really important to us. Let's return to the narrative. Over Crystal Lake, the night became darker. Few, however, had easy sleep. There would be additional threats and pressure tomorrow. Ethan Steele, however, was more familiar with pressure than most. He was able to direct it. How to apply it. And he would know just how to let it out when the time came. The center of Crystal Lake had always been Nina's diner, where talk was as free-flowing as coffee. The cheerful bell over the entrance, however, sounded a caution this morning rather than a welcome. Samantha sat at the counter and watched the storm build up in the reflection of the glass. Outside, the curb was lined with 6 Thunderwolves motorcycles. In the dawn light, their chrome gleamed like teeth. Havoc was seated like a throne within his selected booth. As 3 Summit City forces moved through the diner, Dragon and Cobra flanked him. Without his coffee, Shadow sat aside, keeping a close military eye on everything. Havoc yelled out, his voice full of purposeful authority, "Nina, more coffee. And perhaps we ought to talk about that business plan once more. Due to recent accidents, prices have increased." As Nina raised the coffee pot, her hands trembled a little. Her voice did not waver, though. "I told you already. I don't require your defense. You can call it peace of mind, insurance, or protection." Havoc's smile was as piercing as a piece of glass. "However, everyone has needs. Ms. Steele, isn't that correct?" Samantha continued to eat her breakfast. However, her stance changed a little. Her father taught her mindfulness once more without drawing much notice. She recorded positions, counted footsteps, and monitored movements in the napkin holder's chrome. "Not everybody," she said equitably. "There are others who simply must be left alone." The chair of Havoc scuffed back. His leather cut creaked as he walked carefully toward the counter. Strong statements from the daughter of a plumber. However, strength? He bent in. Knowing who is in charge is a true strength. The entrance of the diner chimed once again. Frank Thompson and Mike Davidson came in after Ethan Steele. They weren't alone, though. Samantha recognized 4 more males from the town who joined them inside. They moved with silent intent, assuming seemingly informal but very serious positions. "Good morning, Nina," Ethan said sweetly. "Please bring coffee for the group." Havoc turned, a look of annoyance on his face. "This meeting is for private business." "There's nothing private about intimidation," Ethan said, maintaining a soft tone. No, not in Crystal Lake. Hands sliding toward concealed weapons, the troops from the mountaintop city stiffened. However, Ethan's veterans were already in place, and their motions revealed training that had not diminished over time. "There are more people than you," Havoc said. But there was a hint of doubt in his voice. "It's not all about numbers," Ethan remarked quietly. "In the SEALs, they teach you something. Like smoke," the word hung in the air. Havoc's brows narrowed as he re-evaluated the silent plumber with fresh insight. Shadow sat up upright in his chair, his face flushed with recognition. Havoc repeated slowly, "SEALs. The lowly plumber has teeth, huh?" He indicated his soldiers. "However, we also do. And more of us are on the way. Isn't that your answer to everything?" Ethan took deliberate steps closer. "More fear, more threats, and more muscle. However, fear may be amusing. If you push too aggressively, people will no longer be terrified. Instead, they become irate." With her chin up, Nina emerged from behind the counter. "You no longer frighten me." "We're not." Havoc's expression grew gloomy. Samantha stepped in between them as he approached Nina. She moved with such ease that it appeared almost casual. However, her posture and the way she carried herself were everything but casual. "Bad idea," she muttered. Ethan was there, his hand snagging Dragon's wrist in a grasp that befitted years of combat experience, even as Dragon charged forward. With white-hot pain shooting through his arm from pressure points, the larger man gasped and fell to one knee. Ethan declared, "Everyone remains calm," with power in his voice that was unrelated to volume. "There should be no harm done today." Slowly, Shadow moved his hand away from his weapons and got up. Speaking to Havoc, he said, "He's right. The way isn't this. Laurel Creek is not like these people. They are unified and well organized. Well prepared." Havoc growled. "In opposition to what? A couple of windows broken? A few frightened store owners?" His voice rose as he surveyed the diner. "You have no idea what's going to happen. The Summit City chapter is giving it their all. This town will find out by tomorrow." Ethan interrupted, "They'll see what true strength looks like. The strength of community, not the power of intimidation. Of individuals gathered together." Dragon scurried back and rubbed his wrist as he let go. The assurance had left their stances as the Thunderwolves crowded around their commander. Instead of facing terrified civilians, they encountered combat-trained veterans under the command of a man whose calm exterior belied his deadly prowess. "This isn't over," Havoc said as he retreated to the door. "By no means." "No," Ethan concurred. "However, things are evolving. The question is, are you intelligent enough to adapt?" Engines roaring to life, the Thunderwolves mounted their bikes. However, Shadow hung around, peering back through the window of the diner. Something moved between them as his eyes met Ethan's, possibly the first seeds of change, understanding. Nina started pouring the veterans coffee as the motorcyclists thundered off. Windows that had been broken and changed too often let in the morning sun. Now, however, it fell on faces that were determined rather than afraid. From the doorway, Officer Cooper replied, "They'll be back." He had come in time to see the altercation. "They will also bring numbers." Accepting a cup of coffee, Ethan retorted, "Numbers don't win fights. Never did. Fights are won by the heart. Conviction. Goal." Samantha observed how easily the local veterans reacted to her father's leadership as he started having small conversations with them. She had always understood that he was more than just teaching her the trade and repairing pipes. She was starting to realize how much more now. The morning went on. Customers who feel more confident are coming back to Nina's diner. But preparations were under progress beneath the veil of normalcy. As they went through the town, Ethan's veterans coordinated resources and shared ideas. Crystal Lake had had enough of fear. On the horizon, storm clouds gathered, portending worse things to come. For Ethan Steele, however, storms were nothing new. He had fought conflicts that never made the press and endured worse in areas that few people knew about. He now had to fight a different type of battle, one for a community's soul rather than for territory or fear. Like all his previous battles, he planned to win this one with greater purpose rather than more force. The reason some men can afford to be gentle was about to be revealed to the Stormrunners. Because they remember exactly how when the time comes to be different. The boom of oncoming motorcycles reverberated through Crystal Lake's pre-dawn streets. It was a comprehensive display of force rather than the typical tiny groups pushing boundaries. Headlights pierced the morning mist like searching eyes as 20 bikers thundered down Main Street. The army of the Stormrunners had arrived. Ethan Steele watched from the shadows of the doorway of his business. He had been anticipating this for hours. Samantha checked the radio next to him, which they had placed at strategic locations throughout the city. Frank's car shop, Nina's diner, and Mike's hardware store all reported being prepared. Despite the strain, Samantha's voice remained steady as she noted that they were dividing into groups. They would, as you stated. Ethan gave a nod. Maverick was employing simple small unit strategies. Shadow or other seasoned members of his squad most likely taught him. It was predictable, he whispered. They mistakenly believe that strategy is the same as overwhelming force. The radio made a crackling sound. The hardware store is where they are. Mike spoke in a controlled but tense tone. There were 8 of them, including Cobra and Dragon. Hold position, Ethan said. No conflict as of yet. First, let them raise their hand. In the shadows was another voice. Not welcome, but unexpected. Maverick has gone crazy. He has given them the order to destroy any company that hasn't paid for protection. Steel Plumbing is the first. Samantha watched Maverick lead his gang toward their business through the mist of the morning. Frustrated wrath twisted the gang leader's face. His aura of invincibility had been broken by the standoff at the diner last night, and he now needed to use violence to repair it. It's time to get to work, Ethan muttered. He made contact with his radio. Everything should go according to plan. Bats and chains were evident in the Thunderwolves' hands as they made their way toward the plumbing shop. However, as they dispersed around the structure, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Along Main Street, lights flashed to life. Every store and establishment abruptly came to life, displaying dozens of citizens, veterans, and civilians from Crystal Lake waiting. With a look of amazement on his face, Maverick abruptly stopped. He hadn't anticipated finding a terrified community like this. Ethan stepped into view and called out politely, "Good morning. Bit early in case of plumbing crises. Do you believe this to be a joke?" Maverick's voice was filled with anger and incredulity. "Do you suppose we're afraid of some lights and some ancient soldiers?" "No," Ethan said, taking slow, deliberate strides forward. "I believe you're afraid already. You brought so many friends because of this." Dragon gave his bike a menacing rev. "We will demonstrate what fear is." A fresh voice interrupted, "You've done enough showing." After removing his Stormrunner's cut, Shadow got off his bike. There was a final thump when the leather struck the floor. "I'm tired of seeing you ruin everything respectable that we created." Shadow was followed by 3 other Thunderwolves, all of whom had slashes that fell to the pavement. All of the veterans are putting their honor before their gang loyalties. Maverick's expression twisted in rage. "Traitors," he spat. "All of you are dead." Ethan did not recoil when he sped his bike in his direction. Rather, he stepped around the machine with the fluid elegance of a predator, reaching out to seize Maverick's collar at the same time. Suddenly, the gang leader was in the air, and then he was familiar with the pavement. Chaos broke out in the night. When Thunderwolves rushed ahead, they encountered coordinated opposition. The precision and coordination of Ethan veterans' movements demonstrated their training. It was more than combat prowess, though. It was the strength of a united populace opposing oppression. Samantha was confronted by Dragon, the enormous motorcyclist who was wielding a chain with lethal intent. She had learned more from Ethan than just pipes and pressure, though. Her forward movement brought her too near for the weapon to work, but she was still inside the arc of the chain. The last thing Dragon noticed before being left gasping on the ground by accurate blows was his astonishment at her skill. "The police are on their way." Over the radio, Officer Cooper's voice crackled. "Stay strong, too. Out for 2 minutes." Shadow fought with Crystal Lake's defenders through the confusion, his military experience showing in every step. He said to a fallen Stormrunner, "This isn't what I signed up for. Instead of being gangsters, we were meant to be brothers." With blood dripping from his split lip, Maverick stood up again. The deadly glow of a man who had lost everything save his passion for violence was seen in his eyes. The blade of the knife glinted in the early morning light as he pulled it. He growled to Ethan, "You took everything. My soldiers, my region, my reputation. That's what you did." Ethan gently answered. "The instant you decided to put fear ahead of deference." With the knife tracing lethal arcs through the air, Maverick charged. However, he was up against a man who had fought against opponents whose skill level made him appear inexperienced, and in circumstances he couldn't have imagined. Because of his years of fighting expertise, Ethan's movements were accurate and efficient. The blade fell to the floor with a clang. Maverick trailed behind, his arm hunched at a slant that suggested adroit joint manipulation. He was held there by Ethan, making sure he understood his position without causing him more pain. "It's over," Ethan muttered. "You have never been the owner of Crystal Lake." The sound of police sirens increased. The majority of the Thunder Wolves had already started to run, leaving behind their discarded cuts and fallen brothers. With their military bearing now being used for a more beneficial purpose, Shadow and his fellow veterans assisted in securing those who were still alive. A transformed town was lighted by the rising sun above Crystal Lake. Damaged property could be restored and broken windows fixed. However, a more significant issue had been resolved: the spirit of the community, its sense of cohesion and purpose. As they observed state policemen gathering statements, Samantha told her father, "You knew. You were aware that they would arrive in force and understood how to deal with them." Ethan grinned a little. "That's how pressure is humorous. If you push too hard, people don't break, instead, they strengthen and bond." Shadow stepped forward with a militaristic stance. "About the other people who left their cuts, sir. We'd like to put this right. Aid in repairing the devastation caused by the Thunder Wolves." Ethan responded that communities always have space for people to choose a better path, particularly veterans returning home. The mist and the shadows of fear that had engulfed Crystal Lake were blazed away as the dawn grew brighter. However, the notion that true strength lies in uniting against fear rather than in inciting it would endure as a result of the events of the night. In search of easy prey, the Thunderwolves had traveled to Crystal Lake. Rather, they had discovered a community governed by a man who recognized that superior purpose, not superior force, is what leads to the greatest triumphs. A humble plumber who had taught his town, just as he had taught his daughter, that true strength comes from choosing to defend rather than from having the capacity to destroy. The morning light exposed the price of the night's conflict, painting Crystal Lake in gold and purple hues. Dispersed debris indicated the locations of battles, broken glass gleamed on sidewalks, and where motorcyclists had left, the pungent odor of burning rubber persisted. However, there was another element present as well. Pride, tenacity, and the first new breaths of fearlessness. Under the watchful eyes of state troopers, Officer Cooper guided Maverick and his core group to patrol cars that were waiting. The gang leader's once swaggering demeanor had been replaced by the gloomy stance of a man who had lost everything he had worked so hard to achieve out of fear, and his face was a mask of impotent wrath. As they walked by Ethan, Maverick spit out, "You don't understand what you've done. The Summit City chapter will not tolerate this." They will. What will they do? Ethan's tone didn't change. To threaten a town that has already been thoroughly beaten, send additional men? Real power doesn't operate like that. With their leather cuts still laying on the roadway like shed snakeskins, Shadow stood with his fellow veterans who had departed the Thunderwolves. Word is getting out about what happened here and how a tiny community resisted them, and Summit City is already calling, he reported. As residents gathered to exchange stories and provide assistance, Dr. Amanda Foster treated minor injuries inside Nina's diner, which was now transformed into an improvised aid center. Samantha came in with materials from the hardware store as the bell rung. Mike is assembling repair teams, she declared. Frank's mechanics are assisting him in boarding up damaged windows until replacements can be obtained. With silent enjoyment, Ethan observed the activities. Crystal Lake was strengthening rather than merely rebuilding. Neighbors who had hardly communicated before the arrival of the Thunderwolves were developing bonds. Steele, Mr. Hesitantly a young Stormrunner who had given up, came forward. Although he had battle scars on his face, there was new optimism in his eyes. There are those among us who served. Our goal is to put things right. Shadow joined them, adding, let's start with Nina's diner. If you'll allow it, we can also fix things. Ethan looked at them carefully. Instead of the seasoned motorcyclists they had been, he saw troops who had lost their way and were now regaining it. Finally, he remarked, communities are built on second chances. And the best way to return to honor is to be honest. More tales surfaced during the morning. How a teenage boy of Frank Thompson assisted veterans twice his age in moving rubble. How Mrs. Weber, in spite of her advanced age, had welcomed people cleaning up inside her house to offer coffee and sandwiches. How Nina Rodriguez found common ground and shared labor with former Thunderwolves to repair her cafe. But the calm had not quite subsided. In a last-ditch effort to prove something, 2 Thunderwolves who had escaped returned, their bikes screaming down Main Street. They discovered a well-organized community rather than a town that was in danger. Before they could cause Maverick, they had to contend with United Town's residents, who had discovered that they were stronger as a team, in addition to Ethan's veterans. As Samantha saw the cops arrest the potential attackers, she thought, you might have wounded them harder. But you held back both times. As he helped board up a damaged window, Ethan said, force isn't about how much damage you can do. It has to do with how much you decide not to do while yet safeguarding what is important. The Summit City chapter had clarified its stance by the afternoon. They didn't want to fight Crystal Lake anymore after losing their best crew and damaging their reputation. It was a community's resistance to be intimidated, not superior violence, that had loosened the Stormrunner's hold on the area. Shadow started the process of change with his fellow veterans. Once used to frighten, their military skills was now utilized to rebuild and defend. They found forgiveness in honest labor and a new purpose while working alongside the townsfolk they had previously terrorized. As they fixed Nina's kitchen, Shadow informed Ethan that they were considering forming a support group for veterans. Assist others in returning without experiencing what we did. Ethan concurred, his hands solid on the wrench. Good men can lose their path. Sometimes all they need is someone to lead them home. Moving throughout town, Samantha coordinated repairs with the same level of accuracy she used to plumbing projects. She suddenly had a different perspective on her father's teachings, realizing that they had covered more ground than just pipe repair. They also included pressure, strength, and the value of maintaining firmness without being tough. As the day went on, Crystal Lake became closer to normal every hour. However, the new normal was more powerful than the old one. A spontaneous planning session for community enhancements was held at the hardware store. Veterans gathered at the diner to exchange tales and discover points of agreement. The car dealership set up a program to teach trade skills to young people in the area. Outside his business, Ethan watched the sunset paint the sky in hues that appeared somehow brighter than before as dusk drew near. Samantha came over to him, her work clothes smeared with the honest grime of a day of reconstruction. This was inevitable, she remarked. In addition to defeating them, this also involves the town coming together and people discovering their own strength. Ethan grinned a little. Sometimes, pressure reveals more than just flaws, it also reveals character, allowing people to demonstrate their true selves and potential. Down the block, Shadow and his veterans were assisting Mike Davidson in installing new security lights as a sign of community vigilance rather than out of fear. With its restored windows reflecting the evening light, Nina's diner radiated warmth. Inside, old rivals ate together and discussed future plans. Samantha noted, "The Stormrunners came to show us their strength. Rather, they assisted us in discovering our own." The wisdom of hard-won lessons was evident in Ethan's voice as he said, "That's the thing about real strength. Making people believe in themselves is more important than instilling dread in them." Over Crystal Lake, the evening descended. The town was no longer afraid of the dark. The strength of togetherness, the boldness of conviction, and the understanding that often the quietest men had the most to teach about true power were all things they had learned that were more potent than intimidation. Stronger ties, deeper roots, and the realization that a community's greatest security lies not in walls or weapons but in the hearts of its members standing together will be the lasting effects of the storm. News spreads quickly in tiny places. 3 delegations from nearby settlements had already come to seek advice by the time the morning sun reached Crystal Lake's recently restored storefronts. With his hands encircling a coffee mug and his voice brimming with urgency, the mayor of Laurel Creek stood in steel plumbing. "We heard what happened here," he continued, observing Ethan's military-like tool arrangement. "How you confronted them and rehabilitated their own guys." Ethan carried on with his work, allowing the silence to reveal the true purpose of the visit. As Samantha got ready for a significant repair project at the community center, she became aware of her father's methodical patience, which allowed the truth to surface. At last, the mayor acknowledged that our businesses are suffering. The Stormrunners who left your town, the ones who are still there, are venting their resentment on us by demanding greater protection charges and wreaking more damage. Ethan noted quietly that the most dangerous animals are those that are injured. They have no power here, so they lash out. Now dressed in work clothes rather than leather, Shadow walked into the shop with a tool belt in place of his old weaponry. When Ethan nodded in greeting, the mayor relaxed after tensing up a little. Shadow reported that the Summit City chapter was collapsing. News of what transpired here circulated. As they recall their former selves, other veterans in their ranks are posing inquiries. Ethan faced the mayor. "You came for more than advice, did you? You come to see if it's true, if there's any chance of change." Instead of responding directly, Ethan ushered them outdoors. After a few days, Crystal Lake had changed. A job training program for veterans was held at the hardware business. Community organizers had started gathering at Nina's diner. Youth mentorship classes were offered by the car shop. As he watched former Stormrunners working among the townsfolk they had formerly terrified, Ethan remarked, "Change isn't just possible. Once individuals realize their own strength, it's unavoidable." Samantha oversaw a team that was fixing the damaged community center in Laurel Creek later that morning. Former Stormrunners were among her employees. Now they applied their knowledge of destruction to reconstruction. Her father had taught her more than plumbing. She had mastered the art of converting adversaries into allies and setting a good example. "They really got this place." With a tone of shame in his speech, one of the repentant bikers confessed. "We used to believe it made us strong, instilling such terror." "Strength builds things," Samantha answered, her words brimming with her father's wisdom. "They are only destroyed by fear." Ethan organized a different kind of gathering back in Crystal Lake, where veterans from 3 counties, including retired soldiers hoping to serve again and former Stormrunners seeking atonement, met in the community hall. What took place here? Ethan spoke to them. In locations he seldom spoke about, his gentle voice carried authority. Didn't include combat. It was about recalling our identity and our past values. At his shoulder, Shadow was a live manifestation of change. "We got lost." To his fellow veterans, he admitted. "Forgot that strength is not about dominating, but about protecting." However, there is still time to remember. That day, they started an endeavor that would expand throughout the area. Veterans assisting other veterans in returning home. Respect rather than fear is the foundation of community protection. Training courses that impart deeper values in addition to useful skills. They learned about the eventual breakup of the Summit City chapter. The rest of the Stormrunners had to make a decision. Either change with the times or become obsolete. Many decided to take Shadow's lead and exchange their cuts for sincere labor and a new sense of direction. "You're being referred to as a hero." That evening, after they had completed their job for the day, Samantha told her father. Stormrunners were broken by this man. Ethan gave a small shake of his head. "Heroes don't do damage. They make them better. One pipe, one individual, one neighborhood at a time, just like we're doing right now." A week later, the Laurel Creek mayor came back with more positive news. Their businesses were rebounding, and the streets were more tranquil. Their sheriff had been approached by former Stormrunners who wanted the same opportunity at atonement that Crystal Lake had provided. "What gave you the idea that it would work?" Ethan was asked. "That they might alter." "Because I've seen it before," Ethan said, recalling previous conflicts. Additional changes. The strongest men are sometimes those who have overcome adversity and learned from their failures. Crystal Lake was no longer merely a town that defied threats. It had turned into a lighthouse, demonstrating to others that change was achievable. Communities could defend themselves by uniting instead of being afraid, proving that strength did not always equate to violence. In order to assist create comparable initiatives in nearby areas, Shadow and his veterans extended their efforts. The lesson Crystal Lake taught each town they visited was that genuine power comes from igniting hope rather than inciting fear. Samantha noticed one evening as another group of veterans arrived seeking advice, "It's spreading. Now, this thing you created has spread beyond our town." With calm hands on a pipe fitting, Ethan nodded. "That's the way true change occurs. Like water that flows, finding its own level, creating its own path, not like a storm that shatters things." As the sun descended over Crystal Lake, its rays touched not only restored structures and fortified communities, but also transformed hearts and rekindled spirits. Instead of destroying them, the storm had shown their true strength, not in fighting skills, but in their ability to turn enemies into comrades, fear into hope, and broken things into something greater than before. Steel Plumbing received the letter in a rumpled envelope with a single photograph inside, along with the morning mail. Ethan took a close look. Surrounded by visiting Stormrunners who had rejected forgiveness, Maverick remained in captivity. Their faces betrayed a desire for revenge. "They're afraid," Shadow noted, looking at the picture. "Lost all of their identity, land, and power. Makes them risky." Samantha said, comprehension dawning in her eyes, like a pipe under too much strain. "No safe means to channel it, no release valve." Ethan carefully positioned the picture on his workbench. "They no longer merely pose a threat to us. Everything we've established, including the programs, the rehabilitation initiatives, and the community's trust, is in danger." Throughout the morning, reports began to come in. They were harassing former Stormrunners who had chosen to be redeemed. Vehicles belonging to reformed members who worked at Laurel Creek were vandalized. It was an obvious message. Betrayal would result in consequences. Officer Cooper showed up with further information. "State Police informed me. In Summit City, a few of the surviving members are getting together to organize a major event." Grimly, Shadow added, "Not only retaliation. They wish to demonstrate that our approach to community development and rehabilitation is ineffective. The only way is through that terror." With his hands steady on a complicated valve system, Ethan moved through this conversation slowly. Samantha, however, saw his focus for what it was, meticulous planning rather than distraction. Finally, he answered, "They'll come at night. Attempt to demolish everything we've constructed. Use Crystal Lake as an example. We ought to call for police assistance," Officer Cooper recommended. "Federal troopers, perhaps state troopers." "No," Ethan said softly. "That's their goal. Violence against violence, a display of force. It would validate their argument. Crystal Lake mobilized during the day, but not in the manner its adversaries might anticipate. The hardware store evolved into a communication hub rather than a weapons coordinating center. Former adversaries got together to plan during strategy sessions at Nina's Diner. Reformed bikers stood shoulder to shoulder with youth program participants from the motor shop. They believe us to be weak. At the community gathering, a former Stormrunner stated, "Since we opted for peace rather than power." Ethan retorted that peace is not weak. His voice was heavy with wisdom gained through hard work. "The toughest strength of all is peace." Shadow reported movement as night fell. They would discover a different town from the one they anticipated terrorizing, but a sizable contingent of surviving Stormrunners was on their way to Crystal Lake. Every store was open and every street was illuminated. People from the community came together in public areas, standing together rather than hiding. Reformed Stormrunners boldly displayed their new identities by dressing in honest work clothing, construction equipment, and mechanics' uniforms that spoke of change. Before they approached the town limits, they discovered that the road was crowded with people despite the increasing rumbling of incoming motorcycles. Not only from Summit City residents banded together in nonviolent opposition, but also from Laurel Creek and Crystal Lake. The bikes slowed, their riders facing the force of transformed lives rather than physical force. Shadow moved forward to confront his formerly brothers. He yelled, "You came to destroy what we've built. Take a close look around. This is the foundation of true strength." Witnesses to metamorphosis, rather than combatants, encircled the survivors. People who had chosen a more difficult but better road, veterans who had found meaning in community service, and former Stormrunners who now mentored disturbed children. "Your choice," Ethan whispered softly as he stood next to Shadow. "Continue living by the outdated guidelines that didn't work for you, or work with us to create something sustainable." Engines sounded, headlamps went down, one by one. The sound of serious, important conversations permeated the night air instead of the sound of confrontation. Tales of repentance and salvation, of lost avenues and new avenues. Later, as they observed old rivals conversing at Nina's Diner, Samantha told her father, "You knew they wouldn't fight. Not after seeing what they would actually be destroying." Ethan nodded while focusing on a gathering of survivors who were paying close attention to Shadow's transformational tale. Admitting that you are fighting the wrong war might be the most difficult battle at times. The crisis was resolved amicably rather than violently. Instead, the holdouts who had come to destroy were faced with the prospect of being saved themselves. Others stayed, lured by the opportunity to start over, while others turned away, unwilling to change. Crystal Lake had been put to the test by exhibiting a different kind of strength rather than by confronting force with force. The power of change, of solidarity, of taking a more difficult but better route. Later that evening, Ethan informed a group of veterans that the true triumph lies not in conquering adversaries but in demonstrating to them a more effective form of strength. Though it was based on understanding rather than fear, the town settled into an uncomfortable peace. As the initiatives expanded, more veterans were reached and more lives were changed. Stories of redemption, rather than acts of destruction, were rewriting the Stormrunner's legacy. The streets of Crystal Lake stayed lit as night fell, not out of fear but as a symbol of optimism. Former adversaries ate meals and discussed future plans in the diner. Newcomers were informed about life-altering programs at the community center. "We are no longer merely repairing pipes, are we?" Observing the action from the doorway of their shop, Samantha questioned. With his hands steady on his instruments, Ethan grinned a little. "Honey, we never were. One relationship at a time, one life at a time, one opportunity for atonement at a time, we were always creating something greater. On the workbench, the picture that had been delivered that morning was forgotten, its danger defeated by the greater force of unified communities and changed lives rather than by force. Crystal Lake discovered that real strength lies in having the guts to restore, forgive, and guide others back to their own homes rather than in having the capacity to destroy. An apparently calm morning in Crystal Lake was rocked by the news. As he gave the information, Officer Cooper stood in steel plumbing with a somber expression. Maverick's charges were lowered through legal wrangling and technicalities, and he was released on bail. Cooper said, closely observing Ethan's response, "He's already left Summit City." Ethan concluded, his hands steady as he arranged his equipment, "Nobody knows where he's headed, but he's coming here." Such men are unable to move past their injuries. Minutes later, Shadow showed up, the strain of the news evident on his face. With their newfound tranquility in jeopardy due to the return of their former commander, the Thunderwolves who had been reformed assembled at Nina's diner. Shadow acknowledged that some of the boys are afraid of him, not of battling him, but of what he stands for, the allure of the simpler route and the old existence. Outside, Ethan observed Samantha coordinating with local politicians through the window of the diner. She had developed into a vital member of their changed neighborhood, not just a proficient plumber. "It's natural to be afraid," Ethan said. "What do we construct on top of those foundations, then, is the question." In the weeks since Maverick's imprisonment, Crystal Lake had undergone a transformation, and the day began with apprehensive expectancy. Former Thunderwolves were now able to find respectable employment thanks to the Veterans Program's expansion. Daily meetings were held at the community center, where former adversaries collaborated to fortify their town. Their rehabilitation operations were operating out of Mike Davidson's hardware store, which served as an unofficial headquarters. The proprietor was engaged in conversation with 3 former Thunderwolves about growing the employment training program when Ethan walked in. Observing Ethan's arrival, Mike remarked, "Now things are different. We have these men in our neighborhood. That cannot be destroyed by Maverick." One of the reformed bikers acknowledged that it wouldn't be simple. "Maverick has a way of getting inside your head and making you doubt everything you've accomplished." Ethan carefully tested the weight of a length of pipe he took up. "Truth is revealed by pressure. That's uncomfortable at times, but it's always required." They heard the first whispers about Maverick's approach by the afternoon. He was not coming by himself. A few remnants of the past had joined him, lured by the allure of their old way of life or the prospect of retribution. Even Ethan was taken aback by Crystal Lake's answer. The people showed quiet resolve rather than fear. The diner continued to operate, providing food to both townsfolk and veterans. The car dealership kept up its youth mentoring initiative. Life continued, but not in defiance, but with a purpose. "He'll think we'll hide," Samantha said. To demonstrate dread, she worked with her father on a challenging repair at the community center. "He doesn't grasp true strength, which is why." Ethan answered. "Never did." By the time Maverick arrived, the sun had already fallen. His modest following no longer seemed so remarkable. Their leather slashes don't feel like power symbols so much as costumes. They discovered that Main Street was bustling with life, with families going about their nightly routines, veterans gathering at the hardware shop, and a community supper at the diner. With his expression contorted at the sight of Shadow and other former Stormrunners working honestly instead of intimidating him, Maverick killed his engine in front of steel plumbing. "What have you turned into?" With a voice full of profound disappointment, he yelled out. "Men at work, citizens, and weak." Ethan did not leave his shop. "He moves in a steady, methodical manner. They've grown stronger in ways you didn't comprehend." Attention was drawn to the altercation, but not in the way Maverick had hoped. People gathered to watch, not to fight, rather than to flee or hide. Shadow begged his old commander to look around. "You really believe that these men are weak? They are constructing something, leading rather than intimidating, and creating rather than destroying. There was no humor in Maverick's laugh. In charge? They're pursuing him relentlessly. He exchanged one master for another and pointed to Ethan. Here's where you're mistaken. Samantha raised her voice, confident and clear. Dad had no desire for followers. He taught every one of us how to discover our own strength. As Ethan approached Maverick, the twilight light softly tinted Crystal Lake, granting the former gang leader an understanding that the former leader had never anticipated. I understand your feelings, Ethan said. Everything around you changed. A man is hazardous because everything you constructed and all you believed you understood changed. Maverick growled, you destroyed everything, but his tone was unsure. No, we taught them how to be stronger. You are eligible for the same promotion. The moment dragged, laden with potential. Crystal Lake held its breath around them. As a testament to the decision he now had to make, former Thunderwolves observed their own changes in their former boss. It's more difficult, Shadow continued, taking a step forward. Our chosen course is more difficult than violence or intimidation, but it creates something tangible. Uncomfortably, Maverick supporters began to view their erstwhile brothers as guys who had discovered a new sort of strength, one that didn't require leather cuts or violent reputations to show itself, rather than as traitors. You can choose what you build on top of the past, but you can't change the past, Ethan continued, his voice brimming with years of hard-won wisdom. The streets were still lit as the night grew darker over Crystal Lake. Anyone in need of food or conversation could find it at the diner, and the community center was bustling with activity. Not everyone would make that decision, but moments of truth when men faced their anxieties and chose a more difficult but better route were the catalysts for change rather than grandiose gestures. Others remained, enticed by the prospect of forgiveness and the chance to create something significant from the ashes of their past life, while some of Maverick's followers vanished into the night, unwilling to undergo change. Ethan witnessed his community carry on with its work as the crisis passed, not with violence, but with silent discussions and tough decisions. New members joined the veterans program, employment training increased, and life continued on, stronger after overcoming the test. Later, Hen they were closing the store, Samantha remarked, you knew he'd come. I knew we would have to deal with this. With his hands confident on the last duties of the day, Ethan nodded. Although there are some storms you cannot prevent, you can construct something robust enough to withstand them. Outside Nina's diner, Dawn discovered Maverick sitting by himself, gazing at his reflection in the window. Without the leather cut, he appeared strangely smaller and more human. Despite his presence, the morning throng went about their daily lives as reformed Stormrunners talked about community initiatives, had breakfast with the folks they had once frightened, and went about their daily lives as usual. Ethan walked slowly toward him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He offered his erstwhile adversary a cup of Nina's coffee, saying it was the greatest in 3 counties. There are some things that never change. The coffee was reluctantly taken by Maverick's hands. He answered in a scratchy, tired voice, everything's changed. Fear was the foundation of all I was and everything I created. Silently, Ethan noted that rust appears solid until pressure is applied, at which point it crumbles. Samantha worked with Shadow and other local leaders inside the diner. They were preparing to bring their network of veteran support services to nearby towns. Maverick observed his former second-in-command working purposefully through the window, with respect offered freely instead of fear imposed. How come you didn't murder me? Maverick inquired abruptly. You had the opportunity to put an end to it that night when I pulled the knife. It's easy to kill, Ethan said, taking a drink of his coffee. Second chances are more difficult. Get stronger. All around them, the dawn unfurled. As former Thunderwolves acquired trade skills, Mike Davidson's hardware business was a hive of activity. The kids' program at the car shop had grown in size. Even the community center witnessed their metamorphosis, as evidenced by the before and after pictures of their repair projects that now adorn its walls. Your daughter. Samantha came out of the diner, and Maverick gave her a nod. I don't frighten her. It was never. Making people fear you isn't what true strength is all about, as she discovered early on. It's about assisting them in discovering their own strength. Shadow came over with their most recent project's construction plans. He nodded at his previous master, not in a submissive but nor antagonistic manner. Today, we're starting construction on the new Veterans Center. More hands would be helpful. There was a lingering invitation. Plenty of significance. Gazing into his coffee, Maverick noticed that his image was warped in the dark beverage. After all, why give me this? Ethan responded that everyone should have the opportunity to create something better than what they have destroyed. Crystal Lake showed what it had become during the day. Some of the new recruits from as far away as Summit City joined the Veterans Program. Former adversaries collaborated on neighborhood projects. Standing up to intimidation was the beginning of a transformation that had expanded into something bigger, a community rehabilitation paradigm. Samantha oversaw a significant plumbing project at the recently constructed Veterans Center. Her crew consisted of former Stormrunners learning the art as well as seasoned craftsmen. She approached each one with the same calm assurance that her father had instilled in her. Test the main line's pressure. She gave instructions. Observing from the sidelines as Maverick watches. Check your sections, everyone. She is knowledgeable. Ethan, who worked nearby, heard Maverick's remark. The people, not just the plumbing. Ethan retorted that being a leader isn't about knowing everything. It's about assisting others in solving their own problems. As the day went on, their altered community was put to the test once more every hour. Tempted by their previous habits, several former Stormrunners found it difficult to stick to their new course. Others gained respect and found strength in hard work. During a break, Shadow addressed his former leader, "It's not easy. Change is real, but it never is. It matters what we're building here." Maverick saw the people of Crystal Lakes going about their daily lives. Something else had taken the place of the fear that had formerly surrounded his presence. Not exactly acceptance, but the potential for it, the opportunity to merit it. Finally, in a scarcely discernible voice, he murmured, "Show me. Show me how to construct a durable object." Under the afternoon sun, Maverick was working with people he had previously commanded, learning the fundamentals of construction under Shadow's tutelage. Once destructive, his hands now awkwardly grasped instruments of creation. Every action was a decision. Every instant is a little conflict between new possibilities and old instincts. As an example of good technique, Ethan suggested starting with the foundation. From there, everything gets more complex. The neighborhood came together at Nina's diner as nightfall drew near to commemorate yet another productive day of advancement. Local families sat down to eat and tell stories with former Thunderwolves. The once insurmountable distinctions had started to become less distinct. "They're observing you," Ethan whispered to Maverick. "To see if change is truly feasible, not out of fear at this time. If someone they believe to be their fiercest adversary is able to find a better way." Maverick watched the scene, the community that had learned to trust, the future they were creating together, and the reformed members who had discovered their purpose. He said, "I don't know how to be anything else. It was everything I had to be feared." "No," Ethan said gently. "You have more than fear, but that's all you choose to utilize. It was always there." Crystal Lake was enveloped in darkness, but it was no longer a menace. As veterans groups convened, the community center was bustling with activity. Evening sessions were held at the car shop. After overcoming its obstacles, life went on, stronger than ever. When they shut down the plumbing shop, Ethan responded, "Tomorrow. Work on the new water main begins. Beneath the surface, real change occurs, like good plumbing. Where everyone benefits even though individuals don't always notice it." Maverick felt the weight of possibilities as it stood in the evening air. His greatest struggle today was to learn how to lead by example, to build rather than destroy, to discover strength and redemption rather than intimidation. He had previously controlled via terror. One soul at a time, Crystal Lake had changed the Thunderwolves, not just helped them survive. Their ability to convert adversaries into allies in the pursuit of a brighter future, rather than defeating them, was the real test of their power in that transition. A significant water main break that threatened Summit City's industrial zone prompted the emergency call just before dawn. The need for Crystal Lake's skills in plumbing and community transformation has increased along with its reputation for recovery. As he observed Samantha assembling their reaction squad, Ethan observed how she incorporated both seasoned plumbers and former Thunderwolves with ease. As her staff loaded equipment, she reminded them that it's not only about replacing pipes. Summit City continues to have doubts about our program and the possibility of people changing. We disprove them today. Maverick stood among the laborers, his hands no longer rough from battle but from hard work. After 3 weeks of consistent practice, his swagger had started to give way to more substantial earned confidence. Then we changed their ideas, Ethan replied, looking at their instruments. They won't welcome us, he said quietly, recalling his own previous deeds in Summit City, particularly me. One interaction at a time, one work at a time. There was tension in the industrial zone when the convoy of work trucks arrived. Businesses were at risk due to the flooding of the streets, but there was obvious worry when former Thunderwolves were spotted working on the repairs. The district manager objected, pointing specifically at Maverick, saying, "We didn't ask for them. These men have already done enough harm to this place." Shadow moved forward with a polished demeanor. "All of the men here are trained, certified, and dedicated to doing honest work, sir. Consider our actions today rather than our past actions." As he saw the exchange, Ethan observed that his reorganized staff responded to the animosity with cool professionalism. Fixing pipes was not the main challenge, rather, it was demonstrating that the change was real and long-lasting. Despite the stress, the job started. Samantha skillfully managed teams, proving why the plumbing knowledge of Crystal Lake was in high demand across the area. Alongside seasoned plumbers were former Thunderwolves. Their former clashes become fruitful collaborations. Maverick cried out, Section 3 pressures dropping, his knowledge of the system expanding with his experience. "We must first isolate that line." Water gushed aloft as a secondary pipe burst. Maverick and Shadow led their teams into the flooded trench without hesitation, coordinating their efforts to stop any harm. Their metamorphosis was more evident in their deeds than in their words. The number of onlookers increased throughout the morning. Once terrified of the Thunderwolves, local business owners now observe their old tormentors as they defend their establishments. Policemen who had opposed them observed them adhering to safety rules and correct protocols. One cop told Ethan, "I never thought I'd see this. These males are not like the others." "People can surprise you," Ethan said, keeping an eye on the state of the repairs. "When you give them the opportunity to overcome their history." The turning point occurred in the middle of the morning when a new set of riders who had not opted for rehabilitation showed there. As they parked across the street, they observed their elderly brothers engaging in honorable work. Maverick stood up from his job, sensing their criticism. His face briefly flashed with the familiar draw of that existence. He then turned to face his rough hands, the sincere labor he had been doing, and the respect he had started to gain. "I ought to speak with them," he said. "Ethan." "Your choice," Ethan said. "But keep in mind that you are now representing more than just yourself." With his tool belt and work pants standing out against their leather cuts, Maverick crossed the street. The passion of the conversation was evident, but it was too far away to hear. Shadow and other reformed members moved to stand by their old leader when voices were raised, but they did so without resorting to violence. One of the bikers requested that you choose this, which was loud enough to carry. "Putting up with those that despise you?" "No," Maverick said in a firm voice. "Instead of destroying it, I decided to build something. Decided to gain respect rather than instill terror." He pointed to the workplace. "Take a look around you, we're making a difference." Something about Maverick's confidence and the honor of hard work made the motorcyclists pause, even if the standoff could have gone ugly. Before they finally left, several of them looked closely at their former brothers, recognizing possibilities they had not previously thought of. The crisis was under control by the afternoon. The repairs to the water main would hold, safeguarding millions of dollars worth of equipment and property, but more had been done. Summit City has witnessed firsthand that things might change and that people who had once been adversaries may end up being important members of the community. Ethan complimented his enlarged staff as they packed up. "Good work today. All of you," said the district manager, his cautious regard replacing his previous mistrust. He acknowledged that I might have made a snap decision. "They know what they're doing, you're soldiers." Samantha retorted, "They're learning more than plumbing. They're discovering their potential." Compared to the morning's drive, the drive back to Crystal Lake was more peaceful. Everybody was deep in thought about what had happened that day, about decisions and their effects, and about the ongoing process of change. "Really, it never ends, does it?" As they unloaded their tools, Maverick inquired. "Establishing our worth and gaining confidence." Ethan said, "That's what makes it real. It's simple to make empty promises. Real transformation requires constant effort." The sky was painted in hues that seemed to symbolize their voyage as the sun fell over Crystal Lake. Darkness gave way to light, and shadow gave way to opportunity. Another veterans group meeting started at the community center. Youth program participants gained useful skills in the car shop. Life kept moving forward. Not only had Crystal Lake transformed itself, but it was also starting to influence change in the surrounding area. Not by coercion or terror, but by the silent power of change, the steady power of example, and the everyday decision to create something better than what was before. The community center was packed with state representatives dressed in suits and other formal wear, which stood in sharp contrast to the working clothes worn by the people of Crystal Lake. They had come to assess the rehabilitation program that had changed the way a whole region approached community reform, not just the Stormrunners. As Samantha and Shadow led the lecture, Ethan remained silently in the back. His daughter had adapted to her duty with ease, and her self-assurance matched her skill. As she described their integrated approach to rehabilitation, the officials paid close attention. "It's not just about job training," she said, pointing to the success rate charts. "Giving people a stake in their community and integrating them into something greater than themselves is the goal." Maverick took a stride forward, his change in appearance and demeanor clear. He pointed to the residents there and said, "I was their enemy 6 months ago. I'm now contributing to their future development. This program provides a purpose in addition to a work." Urgent news interrupted the presentations in the morning. Laurel Creek's vital infrastructure was devastated by a powerful storm, endangering multiple neighborhoods. The knowledge of Crystal Lake was required for both community reaction coordination and repairs. "Perfect timing," remarked one official doubtfully. "Let's observe how your ex-offenders respond to a genuine emergency." Ethan observed the mobilization of his enlarged team. Alongside seasoned plumbers, former Stormrunners loaded equipment, demonstrating months of work and increasing expertise in their moves. People were eager to assist their neighbors without hesitation or distinction between their old and new lifestyles. "They're leading it, not just handling it," he said quietly. Samantha demonstrated her coordination skills at the scene of the incident. She led groups of priests, making use of their individual talents. Maverick's crew took care of the complex pipe work that their newfound abilities had equipped them for, while Shadow's group handled the heavy machinery. Ethan reminded them as they evaluated the damage. "Character is revealed by pressure. We reveal to them our true selves today." It was a difficult task that called for both technical expertise and community collaboration. After being first skeptical of assistance from former Stormrunners, the locals were forced to work with men they had previously despised and witnessed firsthand the reality of their metamorphosis. An unexpected pipe burst that threatened to flood an elderly care facility was a pivotal moment. Working closest to the crisis, Maverick made a snap decision. His earlier leadership abilities were now directed toward protecting rather than intimidating, and he led his squad with composed authority. The facility's director subsequently said, "I never thought I'd say this, but we're grateful to have you here, all of you." The state officials watched all day long. They observed more than merely technical proficiency. They saw the real transformation of persons who had previously posed the greatest threat to the area. They witnessed old rivals cooperating amicably and witnessed ties within the society being reinforced by a common goal. During a short pause, an official told Ethan, "Your daughter, she handles these men like she's been doing it her entire life." Ethan retorted that she had seen early on that being a leader isn't about controlling others when observing Samantha manage another repair crew. The goal is to bring out the best in them. With a new purpose for his military bearing, Shadow came forward to give them information on their progress. "We discovered more damage in the north sector, but the main line is okay. The crew from Maverick is already on it." The officials looked at each other, the reformed gang members' natural leadership, and the ease with which former enemies cooperated. It made them reevaluate their assumptions about rehabilitation. The immediate issue had been contained before evening. The people of Laurel Creek would be safeguarded by the repairs. But there was more that had been done. One more example that transformation was not only feasible but also long-lasting. During the last inspection, one official admitted that this was real. "There is more to what you have created here than merely a program." As he observed his enlarged team tidying up the job site with expert efficiency, Ethan nodded. "It is based on choice rather than regulations or specifications. These folks make the decision to improve upon their past every day." There was a sense of peaceful satisfaction on the journey back to Crystal Lake. Even the state representatives who were riding along to finish their assessment appeared moved by what they had seen. The town's change was visible in the evening light, not only in the restored infrastructure but also in the fortified ties within the community. Maverick assisted with setting up the work schedules for the following day at the community center. Shadow worked with organizations that serve veterans. With every little action supporting their new course, the rhythm of creative life persisted. "What did I discover today?" As they stacked equipment, Maverick spoke to Ethan. "I wasn't thinking about demonstrating anything when that pipe burst. It was about safeguarding those in need." "That's how true change happens," Ethan said. "It's a part of who you are, not something you're attempting to express." As night fell over Crystal Lake, conversations regarding the program's expansion to other areas were held in the community center. The purpose of the state authorities' visit had changed from assessment to instruction, as they saw how the transformation of one town may serve as a template for others. Something important had come out of the day's events. Crystal Lake underwent profound alteration that withstood the test of time, not only superficial restoration. They had created something that was effective because it gave individuals a better way to be powerful, not because it was mandated. The seeds of wider transformation were planted in that strength, and they spread by the silent power of example and the everyday decision to create something worthwhile rather than by coercion or compulsion. Crystal Lake changed more quickly than anyone had predicted after receiving state authority. Now, the once quiet community center was bustling with bustle as new members showed up every day, enticed by tales of change. From his shop window, Ethan observed another set of ex-gang members arrive, their motorcycles uncertain like their riders but no longer dangerous. During the morning meeting, Shadow informed that we are running out of room. Additionally, some of the founding members are concerned that we are expanding too quickly and losing the things that made this effective. Samantha traced the increasing numbers on the registration lists with her finger. Just this week, 30 fresh applicants from 3 separate counties applied. Unexpected tensions were being created by the strain of success. 2 reformed members, both months into their rehabilitation, had argued that morning about the trade program's teaching strategies. Old habits that threatened to resurface under new stress and developing pains had almost made the dispute physical. Ethan watched silently, but there was worry in his eyes. In Crystal Lake, they had constructed something valuable. It could not be destroyed by growth. Dusty from the building site, Maverick walked into the store wearing his work clothes. Without introducing himself, he said, "The new guys. Not all of them are previous riders. People from street gangs and former criminals are hearing about us and are interested in what we have created." Samantha questioned, "Isn't the goal to assist anyone who is willing to change? Can our foundation support the weight we're placing on it?" "Is the question," Shadow continued. The difficulties of the day validated their worries. An argument between newcomers and original members about tool distribution at the hardware business swiftly got out of hand. With a tight voice, Mike Davidson called Ethan for assistance. As Ethan came, Mike clarified that things are different now. The first group understood the significance of this for us. Some of these new people only perceive a program to join, not a community to create. In the rear lot of the store, Ethan discovered two groups faced off. The tension in the body language was familiar. Guys who were accustomed to using force to solve problems were trying to find an alternative. "What is the actual problem here?" He moved between them and asked. One of the original members said, "They don't respect what we built, believe that everything we have learnt is meaningless and that they can simply take over." A newcomer moved forward, his sleeves pushed up to reveal his prison tattoos. "Like you, we came here to change, yet you act as though you control the land and that your path is more important than ours." Ethan paid close attention and could sense the fear hiding beneath the rage. The founding members, their hard-won community, the newcomers, and their opportunity for change were all things that both sides feared would be lost. Finally, he stated that pressure does more than only highlight issues. It makes opportunities visible. Our true selves are revealed by how we respond to this. Buildings by themselves wouldn't address the underlying problem, but Samantha and Nina had been working on a solution, turning an abandoned warehouse into more training space. Ethan convened a special gathering at the community center that evening. With both new members and town residents feeling the strain of rapid development, every chair was occupied. His voice carried to every corner as he said, "Look around. Observe what? I see men who have chosen a more difficult route, men who have battled their way out of darkness. That decision is what unites us, regardless of how long you've been here." Standing, Shadows spoke to both new and returning members. "I believed that strength meant standing by myself when I initially arrived here. I learned from this community that it means standing together." Maverick joined him, demonstrating the effectiveness of the approach. "Here, we're not simply teaching jobs, we're teaching trust and demonstrating that change is achievable. What are we truly constructing if we are unable to give others that trust?" The room's tension gradually changed. New members started to hear of the early hardships of the original members. Newcomers talked candidly about their goals and anxieties. With several crews collaborating to make room for additional transformation, the warehouse conversion project came to represent their growth. Later that week, Ethan told a group of newbies that it was similar to plumbing. You can't simply increase pressure without fortifying the system as a whole. Every joint must be examined, every connection must be strong, and every line must be verified. As previously, Crystal Lake adjusted. Peer mentorship was added to the veterans program. The trade class has been reorganized to match new members with more seasoned ones. Under hardship, the community's base strengthened rather than crumbled. As they observed mixed laborers renovating the warehouse, Samantha told her father, "You knew this would happen. The challenges, the growing pains, the need to adjust." With calm hands on a pipe fitting, Ethan nodded. Making the initial better decision isn't enough to bring about change, you also need to make that decision every day, especially when things get difficult. The warehouse project was painted in gentle hues as the sun descended over Crystal Lake. Inside, once adversaries collaborated to teach and learn from one another while creating something greater than themselves. The tensions of the day had exposed opportunity rather than weakness. The opportunity to demonstrate that their metamorphosis was genuine enough to be shared. Shadow noted that the foundation is strong as he watched veteran members teach beginners the fundamentals. Because its foundation was more robust than regulations or specifications. Constructed on decision, Ethan concurred. The everyday decision to improve ourselves and assist others in returning home. A shared dinner at Nina's diner marked the conclusion of the evening. The tables are crowded with guys at various points in their lives who have made the decision once more to be a part of something greater than themselves. Instead of shattering Crystal Lake's spirit, the strain of expansion had made it stronger. And that strength held the potential for broader change, which would expand via the constant force of transformation rather than by force or speed. One day, one life at a time, one decision. On Ethan's desk, the mayor of Summit City's invitation was resting on formal letterhead stark against Warren Wood. They wanted financing and resources for Crystal Lake's program to be extended throughout the entire county. Although success had offered opportunities, Ethan could see the price of their accomplishment imprinted in Samantha's weary eyes as she finished another 18-hour day. Her voice bearing the weight of persistent demand, she announced that 3 additional towns had asked for program help. Additionally, before we open the new training center, the warehouse remodeling needs to pass another inspection. The plumbing industry that had previously characterized their days now coexisted with incessant meetings, ongoing coordination, and the perpetual demands of an expanding program. It had been days since Ethan had patched a pipe himself, his abilities were more suited for fixing people than plumbing. How recently did you get more than 4 hours of sleep? Quietly, he asked his daughter. Shadow showed up with additional questions before she could respond. The expansion of the program was causing 2 reformed members to feel lost among the increasing numbers. The small group of people who had supported their transformation was growing into a bigger, more formal organization. They're not incorrect, Shadow acknowledged. It's getting thin, like pipe walls under too much strain, yet we're helping more people. Maverick joined them, a similar tension on his face. Although he was now a well-respected program coordinator, the former gang boss had to deal with new responsibilities as a leader. He read the letter from the mayor and added, "Summit City is providing everything we stated we needed. But at what price? Do we lose what initially made this effective and end up being simply another rehabilitation program?" Ethan observed his daughter, his enlarged family, the community they had created together, the reformed men who had discovered a new purpose. With each being pulled in various directions by increasing expectations, success threatened to tear them apart. "Dad?" Samantha's voice was worried. "You haven't discussed the expansion offer much." "I can't give you all the answers," he said. "Together, we constructed this. Together, we choose its future." That night, there was an emergency meeting in the community center. The gathering was full of town residents, newcomers, and founding members who were all feeling the pressure of making a choice. The Summit City offer offered them much-needed resources, but it also wanted standardization, which may be fatal to their mission. "I can still recall my first day here." A reformed member raised his voice. "I wasn't changed by the work or the classes. I was being treated like a person worth believing in by Ethan and Samantha. If we're processing hundreds, how do we maintain that?" Nina stood there, her diner no longer merely a place to meet. "Perhaps we are misjudging this. We don't have to lose our souls in order to grow. It might entail sharing it in a new way." The conversation went on far into the night. Shadow suggested a mentorship program that paired more seasoned members with less seasoned ones. Maverick recommended satellite programs that adapted to local demands while upholding the values of Crystal Lake. "Why does this work?" At last, Ethan spoke. "It's the everyday decision to believe in something greater than ourselves, not the strategies or the tools." Samantha had been silent, taking it all in. She moved on now, temporarily forgetting her fatigue. Suppose we did both. Preserve Crystal Lake as the center, the birthplace, and the home of the fundamental principles. Spread such principles using Summit City's resources, but never forget what makes them effective. The answer started to take shape. The warehouse would develop into a leadership institution as well as a training facility, teaching reformed members how to spread the values of Crystal Lake to other localities. The program would develop by setting an example rather than by growing. With pleasure in his voice, Ethan remarked that it was like teaching someone to fish, seeing his daughter plan rather than attempting to feed everyone ourselves. The days that followed were filled with obstacles as well as confirmation. The founding members took on the role of mentors, discovering a new purpose and sharing their experiences. Smaller groups were established by newcomers, preserving the close ties that enable change. As they eventually shut down the store late one evening, Samantha told her father, "You knew we'd reach this point." Ethan nodded, his hands returning to familiar instruments with appreciative purpose as success turned into its own type of test. Not only does pressure highlight issues, it also highlights previously unknown solutions. They presented their counterproposal to the mayor of Summit City. While expanding together, Crystal Lake would continue to be independent. They would share values, develop leaders, and encourage development, but they would never forego the interpersonal ties that enable change. During the presentation, Shadow clarified that it's not just about the numbers. It has to do with depth. One person at a time, one decision at a time, is how real change occurs. Ethan observed from his shop window as both new and old members collaborated on the warehouse refurbishment as dusk fell over Crystal Lake. The strain of the past several weeks had shown fresh strength, the capacity to develop without losing their base, rather than weakness. With Maverick standing next to him, he noted, "We're not just fixing broken things anymore. We're creating something durable." "We always were," said Ethan softly. Making connections that withstand pressure is the goal of the software, the plumbing, and the adjustments we make. A smaller gathering inside Nina's diner marked the end of the evening. A peaceful supper was enjoyed by the core group, Ethan, Samantha, Shadow, Maverick, and those who had been there from the beginning. They were worn out but content since they had managed to increase their influence without compromising their morals. Samantha noted that tomorrow might present new difficulties, but her grin was back. New opportunities to validate what we have created. Together, Ethan continued, surveying his enlarged family. It functions like way. Not only the program or the values, but the individuals who make the daily decision to be a part of something greater than themselves. Another challenge had been put to Crystal Lake, this time one of success rather than opposition. They had discovered a path that respected their history while constructing their future. Instead of shattering them, the strain of growing had brought out their best qualities. When Samantha spoke to the first group of program leaders, the new training facility was bustling with activity. 20 men and women were selected from various places based on their ability to spread the message of change from Crystal Lake. Ethan saw his own lessons mirrored in his daughter's mannerisms as he watched her dominate the room through the warehouse windows with quiet assurance. With the weight of experience in her voice, she clarified that it's not about systems or regulations. It all comes down to having faith in people's ability to change and then providing them with the means to do so. Shadow and Maverick, who were mentors in their own right and not merely repentant members, sat among the trainees. Months of demonstrated leadership had won them their positions, and their personal changes had set an example for others to follow. Their first actual test was interrupted by a call from Laurel Creek. In search of the kind of change they had heard about in Crystal Lake, a group of ex-gang members had gone to local sheriff. It was time to demonstrate the viability of their expansion concept. As Samantha gathered her crew, Ethan informed her that this was her operation. "You now have all the knowledge you require." As she was getting ready, she stopped and looked at her father's face. "You won't be coming. You have to learn some lessons by doing," he said. "In addition, I need to fix several pipes here. It's time for me to return to it." Samantha led the convoy as it left for Laurel Creek, followed by Shadow, Maverick, and a few members of the training class. As he watched them leave, Ethan experienced a mixture of pride and the normal anxiety that comes with a parent seeing his kid fully embrace her own strength. Mike Davidson saw his obsession at the hardware store. Letting them take care of things without you must be weird. Ethan said that it was similar to witnessing your child ride a bike for the first time. You want to run with them even though you know they're ready. Laurel Creek provided updates all day long. Samantha had developed the same taciturn influence that had been effective at Crystal Lake, earning people's trust with deeds rather than words. By managing a tough scenario with former rivals through discussion rather than conflict, Shadow and Maverick showed their maturity. Officer Cooper brought news from his colleagues in Laurel Creek and said, "Your daughter. She has the ability to connect with people. Better, perhaps. She ought to be." After repairing the station's problematic water heater, Ethan responded. "She gained knowledge from everyone we assisted. Witnessed the actual process of change. The day had its share of difficulties. The program's emphasis on interpersonal relationships over strict structure caused some trainees to suffer. As they encountered identical circumstances from the opposing side, others discovered that their own prior fights were resurfacing. However, the fundamental values of Crystal Lake were proven to be valuable. In Laurel Creek, a disagreement between two ex-gang members was resolved without the use of force or regulations. Samantha used it as a subdued reminder that everyone should have the opportunity to move past their past. During their evening debrief, she informed her team that pressure is more than just a pipe test. It puts people to the test and reveals their true nature. Ethan held a training of his own back in Crystal Lake. After hours, local veterans and reformed members who had demonstrated their readiness for leadership roles congregated in the shop to acquire the nuanced skills of direction rather than control. According to Shadow's phone report, "Your daughter is doing well. Do you recall how you guided me back? Now, she does that for other people. The same calm power, the same faith in potential." As they discovered what was effective and what required modification, the warehouse training center carried on with its job. Every success in nearby communities demonstrated that their approach could be adopted without compromising its core values. Ethan told a group of trainees that it's similar to proper plumbing design. Proper pressure becomes more crucial the farther you are from the source, but the fundamentals remain the same. Crystal Lake was quieter than normal in the evening. The calm felt earned rather than hollow, even if many of its important members were working in other communities. Instead of being absent, it is the silence of purpose. Although the crowd at Nina's diner was lower than usual, the discussions demonstrated their progress. Community leaders coordinated support across town boundaries, veterans organized outreach initiatives, and reformed members talked about their roles as mentors. As she served Ethan his normal coffee, Nina remarked, "It's strange not having everyone here. Good strange, though, like seeing your family mature." Observing the mix of new and old members sharing meals and stories, Ethan concurred that's precisely what it is. Family is expanding, evolving, and figuring things out on its own. Samantha came back from Laurel Creek late that evening, exhausted yet content. In the shop, she discovered her father tinkering with a recalcitrant valve assembly. As she took her usual place at the workbench, she continued, "They asked me how we make it work. How we transform fear into strength and adversaries into allies. What did you say to them? That making things work isn't the goal. While you did for all of us, it's about letting individuals figure things out on their own and supporting them while they do so." Seeing the genuine success of their program in his daughter's words, Ethan grinned. Real strength is found in assisting others in discovering their own power, not merely in the lives or communities that are altered. With the soft sounds of labor and purpose, the day came to a close just as it had started. However, something had changed, expanded, and changed. Crystal Lake had demonstrated that its ideas could proliferate without becoming diluted and that change could occur without losing its fundamental truth. And the seeds of something bigger were planted in that growth. A movement based on the basic conviction that people can change, rather than on coercion or fear. One day, one life at a time, one decision. Between small communities, news spread quickly. The Summit City study was concerning since it revealed that yet another rehabilitation program had failed miserably, with participants going back to their previous behaviors in a matter of weeks. All of these activities, including Crystal Lake's growing initiative, were now being questioned by detractors. During the morning meeting, Shadow announced that 60 guys had thrown their system in just 2 months. Fast processing, little oversight, and lots of publicity. They're all back on the streets now, and things are worse than they were. As he listened, Ethan diligently worked on a complicated valve arrangement. Despite the alarming news, his hands remained precise. He noted that quick modifications are similar to quick plumbing fixes. Although they may appear attractive at first, they are not resilient. Samantha's face was disturbed as she studied the reports. Through rigorous structure and discipline, the failing program had promised rapid results. They had shown that everything was ineffective. She said, "They're calling us too slowly. Too selective, not effective." Effective? There was bitter comprehension in Maverick's voice. "It took me 3 weeks to come to terms with the possibility of change. I want it for myself, not just to prove something, and I'll want it for another month." Over the course of the day, the criticism increased. Embarrassed by their failing initiative, Summit City authorities publicly questioned Crystal Lake's practices. Why did they only accept a small number of people? What caused the lengthy recovery period? Where were the immediate outcomes that taxpayers were hoping for? "They don't get it," Shadow said to a group of program participants. "Trust cannot be hurried. You can't make someone take a different route." An emergency session was held at the Warehouse Training Center. Similar pressures were reported by representatives of its satellite programs in nearby communities. Everyone desired quick fixes, straightforward answers, and straightforward responses to challenging issues. As he saw his daughter respond to the issues, Ethan noticed how much she had changed from the young woman who had previously just been concerned with pipe repair. Samantha told the leaders gathering that quick changes are like patches. They don't address issues, they just conceal them. Because people choose it for themselves, we're aiming for a more profound, genuine shift that endures. The director of the unsuccessful initiative led an unexpected delegation from Summit City. His suit cost a lot of money. He had an aggressive demeanor. His knowledge of rehabilitation was restricted to procedures and data. Looking at their records, he conceded, "Your success rate is impressive. However, your throughput is unachievably low. Processing every candidate in the area would take years at this pace." "People are not processed by us," Ethan said quietly. "We assist them in returning to their potential selves. It takes however long it takes." The altercation attracted notice. While the delegation saw their facilities, reformed members gathered at Nina's diner. Each Crystal Lake success story served as evidence of the patience and faith their program needed. Ethan recommended to Shadow and Maverick that they show them. Give them a glimpse of what true change looks like. An spontaneous exhibition of altered lives, rather than rules or procedures, was organized by the former gang leaders. Veterans discover a new purpose in mentoring others, and former adversaries collaborate on community projects. Actual change that results from daily decisions rather than coercion. Shadow pointed to Ethan and told the delegation that he never ordered us to do anything or make us change. Instead of letting us make that decision for ourselves, he demonstrated a better way to be powerful. The director of Summit City was still dubious. "However, how can you keep everything under control? Where is your system of discipline? Command?" Maverick's laugh was no longer resentful. "Examine your surroundings. We are not under control. We're dedicated. There is a distinction." As the day went on, additional proof of the disparity in methods surfaced. Crystal Lake had created a more profound, sincere change that originated internally, whereas Summit City's program had concentrated on external compliance. As Samantha worked with program leaders from 3 communities, the director spoke to Ethan, "Your daughter. I don't think she understands this as well as I do." Ethan answered, "She learned what I learned. Making people change isn't that true strength. It's in assisting them in discovering their own motivations for improving." More guests arrived in the evening, including program members from the unsuccessful endeavor who were looking for long-term solutions rather than temporary ones. They discovered a community willing to support their sincere desire for change, rather than a system to process them. During their intake interviews, Samantha informed them that it's more difficult this way. It needs more work and time, but it endures because it becomes a part of who you are rather than just what you're supposed to be. The delegation from Summit City left knowing more about the reasons for the success of Crystal Lake's program. It was genuine, not because it was fast or effective. Before departing, the director acknowledged that we had been seeing it incorrectly. When rehabilitation is more like, well, good plumbing, it's being treated like a production line. Every joint must be tested, every line must be confirmed, and every connection must be strong. Ethan grinned a little. "You're starting to get it now." As night fell over Crystal Lake, talks on upholding their values in the face of external pressure continued to take place in the community center. The training center in the warehouse was bustling with activity. As new members started their journey, they aimed for long-term transformation rather than immediate improvement. As Samantha joined her father for a late coffee at Nina's, she noted that they wanted us to defend our approach. The true defense, however, was in each individual present who made the decision to change and then made the daily decision to remain changed. Ethan retorted, "Because true strength isn't in forcing people to be different," his hand still bearing the honest filth of a day's plumbing labor. "It's in assisting them in discovering their true selves." Despite the criticism, Crystal Lake remained resolute. It had strengthened their realization that real change could not be hurried or coerced. Like the lives they assisted in rebuilding and the pipes they repaired. Time, faith, and the guts to choose a more difficult but better route were necessary for long-lasting answers. 3 counties experienced suffering as the economic impact spread like a sudden cold and the shutdown of a large industry in Summit City. As the ripple effects reached Crystal Lake, Ethan observed them. Aware that their program was up against its biggest challenge to yet. It comes from the crushing weight of universal need, not from resistance or censure. Samantha informed, in a worried tone, that there were 4 training facilities, 12 satellite programs, and more than 200 participants. The squeeze is now being felt by all. Funding is at risk, jobs are being lost, and community support is being overextended. The training center in the warehouse has developed into a crisis management center. Maverick tried to keep vital services running while Shadow organized responses from various communities. Not only was their program at risk, but the communities they had assisted in rebuilding were also at risk. People are afraid, Shadow acknowledged. Old habits become alluring again when things get tough. With careful motions, Ethan made adjustments to a plan that was spread out on his workbench. "Natural fears," he said. "What we construct on top of it is what counts." There were further difficulties that day. In Laurel Creek, a construction project that employed reformed members had closed. Summit City's financing for rehabilitation was at jeopardy due to budget constraints. Local companies were struggling, and even Crystal Lake was feeling the strain. Samantha addressed their assembled leaders, "We didn't build this program for easy times. We made it to withstand difficult times." Their reaction started to take shape. In order to handle emergency repairs at lower rates, the auto shop's training program was enlarged. Nina's Diner set up a program for communal meals. The hardware store developed become a hub for resource sharing throughout municipalities. "Do you recall our lesson about pressure?" During an emergency meeting, Ethan inquired. "It reveals solutions we were unaware we had, in addition to issues." Reformed members from all around the region were mobilized by Shadow, and their expertise is currently being used to help communities in need. Mechanics kept vital cars operating for low-income families. For important repairs, construction workers volunteered. Entire towns relied on the rehabilitative network they had established. When a group of program participants watched their mentors in action, Maverick said, "This is what real strength looks like, not taking advantage of hard times, but helping others through them." Samantha's ability to coordinate was essential. She matched abilities with needs by managing resources across communities, ensuring that no municipality had to deal with its difficulties alone. Now, the framework they had created for transformation proved useful in unexpected ways. Officer Cooper told Ethan, "Your daughter. She is no longer merely operating a program. Communities are being held together by her." Something significant was exposed by the pressure. Their people were the real strength of their network, not its structure. Once removed from their communities, reformed members now spearheaded initiatives to assist them. Veterans who had discovered meaning in mentoring went on to become community organizers. At a late-night planning discussion, Shadow noted, "We're not just teaching jobs anymore. People are learning how to be a part of something greater than themselves from us." In order to adapt, the Warehouse Training Center included lessons learned from the crisis to its curriculum. Along with trade skills, participants also acquired crisis management, resource coordination, and community leadership. As Ethan told a group of trainees, strength is more than just being steadfast. It's about adapting without losing your base, about bending without breaking. The tenacity of their network became clear as the weeks went by. As other ventures faltered or were discontinued, Crystal Lake's initiative gained momentum. Communities helped one another by pooling resources and working together. Economic difficulty turned out to be less resilient than the ties they had formed. "Look at this," Samantha said one evening as she showed her father news from other communities, reformed members directing emergency response teams, veterans setting up support networks, and erstwhile adversaries cooperating to maintain community services. She went on, "They're not just surviving the crisis. They are demonstrating to the world what true community looks like." Coordinators from other communities gathered in Nina's diner, which stayed open late. The topics of discussion shifted from rehabilitation to sustainable community development. Each individual there had a success tale of transformed purpose as well as personal transformation. When did we believe that this was only about repairing pipes and making a difference in people's lives? In a quiet time, Shadow asked Ethan. With his hand still bearing the honest dirt of the day's labor, Ethan grinned a little. "You build some things, and you fix others. Knowing the difference is the trick." Lights burned in 3 counties worth of houses and businesses as night fell over Crystal Lake. Now, out of purpose rather than fear. Instead of shattering their network, the crisis had brought out its best qualities. At the community center, a brief ceremony marked the conclusion of the evening. A permanent framework for mutual support was established when leaders from various communities convened to formally establish their collaboration. The document they signed now spoke of community change rather than rehabilitation. Samantha informed the assembled representatives, "This is what we really built. Not merely a network or program, but a fresh approach to unity." From the rear, Ethan observed how far they had gone since their initial days of resisting coercion. Their foundation had not been undermined by crisis pressure, rather, it had demonstrated its depth. How powerful it had become. They had discovered that true change went beyond personal development. The goal was to create relationships that would withstand any adversity. About building groups of people who were stronger when they helped one another instead of standing by themselves. Sitting in Steel Plumbing's office with her briefcase stuffed with promises and proposals was the governor's representative. With significant cash and official backing, the state sought to expand Crystal Lake's program to all counties. With his hand still bearing the scars from the plumbing job that morning, Ethan listened quietly. She put paperwork across his workbench and explained, "Your success rate is unprecedented. The state wishes to establish this as a formal policy and standard practice for all forms of rehabilitation. Samantha watched activity at the warehouse training center across the street from the window. Maverick was overseeing a complicated community project, and Shadow was conducting a training for new program directors. Everything they had constructed had expanded beyond their original scope. Normal practice, Ethan said quietly. What worries me is that more tourists arrived that day, along with representatives from neighboring states, journalists looking for stories, and specialists interested in learning about their strategies. Crystal Lake has become into more than just a prosperous venture. It was now seen as an example of how to change a community. Speaking to a group of program leaders, Shadow said, "They don't understand. What we do cannot be standardized. Everybody has a unique journey. Every community faces unique difficulties." As delegates from many communities exchanged experiences, the warehouse training center was bustling with activity. Their network had developed naturally, with each site customizing Crystal Lake's tenets to suit its own need. Everyone was concerned about the idea of making that into a strict regulation. Samantha reminded them of where we had come from. With belief, not with procedures or methods. Faith in the ability of communities to heal and in the ability of individuals to change. While weighing their alternatives, Ethan worked on a challenging repair project. The state's offer threatened to turn their individual strategy into institutional policy, but it also promised the resources they needed and the expansion they had envisioned. "He's not what I expected, your father, the governor's aide," said Samantha. "He appears to be a plumber for someone who has constructed all of this." Samantha gave a small smile. "In our own way, he and all of us are just that. We maintain what's important, make connections, and make repairs." Throughout the day, the pressure to make a choice increased. Other rehabilitation programs were already attempting to replicate their strategies, but they frequently failed to capture the core elements that made Crystal Lake's strategy effective. When they attend a leadership meeting, they witness the chaos and the structure. They fail to see the essence of the training, community service, and support systems. Nina's Diner was the scene of a constant stream of conversations as locals considered their possible future. Members who had undergone reform were concerned about losing the personal ties that had saved them. Veterans were concerned that their mentorship program would be reduced to a state system checkbox. "Show them," Ethan said softly. "Show them what makes things work in the end." There was no formality or planning to the demonstration. Crystal Lake was just being itself. Officials saw as erstwhile adversaries collaborated on neighborhood projects. They witnessed veterans mentoring others and discovering new meaning in life. They saw the daily wonder of individual growth spread throughout societies. As Samantha coordinated between 3 towns at once, the state representative said to Ethan, "Your daughter. She manages all of this as if she were destined for it." "She discovered what's important," Ethan said. "Systems aren't the real change. It's about people making the daily decision to improve upon who they were." The community center saw a different kind of gathering in the evening. They told tales of change from representatives of each community in their network. Communities as a whole acquire new power through unification, not simply individual improvements. Shadow informed the officials that this is what they wish to standardize. However, trust cannot be forced. Cannot control real change. The core of the program was demonstrated by the nighttime sessions held in the warehouse training facility. Along with learning skills, new participants also learned values. Veterans exchanged understanding as well as knowledge. Each exchange demonstrated why their strategy couldn't be boiled down to a policy. Samantha assured the state legislators, "We'll help expand. We will impart all of our knowledge, but not as a routine practice, but rather as a means of recognizing potential in individuals and communities." Ethan had time to reflect after working late in his shop doing the same old plumbing repair. The governor's aide discovered him there, her initial conviction giving way to careful deliberation. As she observed him at work, she remarked, "I think I understand now." This application isn't only meant to be copied. It's a shared philosophy. Lights glowed in houses and businesses throughout their network of towns as night fell over Crystal Lake, not just in their town today, but everywhere their influence had extended. Each light symbolized a transformed purpose in addition to altered lives. At their last meeting, Ethan informed the assembled officials, "We didn't build this to be a model. We created it to endure and develop organically via sincere transformation and genuine connection." There was a revised suggestion toward the conclusion of the evening. The state would encourage the program's natural expansion rather than standardizing it. Crystal Lake would continue to be in the center, imparting their philosophy to others who would modify it to suit the requirements of their own society. Samantha informed the representatives that some things cannot be required. They must be chosen, earned, and worked for on a daily basis. A community that had evolved from resisting intimidation to teaching others the true meaning of strength was illuminated by the lights of Crystal Lake reflecting off the warehouse windows. Through the silent strength of faith in people's ability to change, not by coercion or terror. Ethan watched the morning activities across Crystal Lake from the doorway of his business. Since those initial tense days of conflict with the Stormrunners, the community has undergone significant change. Now, while new members gained knowledge from their experience, reformed members spearheaded community efforts. The transformational cycle was now self-sustaining. 3 brand new training facilities are applying for certification. Samantha stated that her position as a leader was now well established. Additionally, Shadow is adding 5 more counties to its veteran program. Long shadows were cast across Main Street by the rising sun as Ethan arranged his instruments with his usual accuracy. Even though his hands were still familiar with every wrench and fitting, his position had shifted from taking direct action to more advising. "Dad?" In her morning updates, Samantha halted. "You're not talking as much as you usually do." "Just observing," he said quietly. "Observing our progress." Shadow guided leadership seminars for the upcoming generation of program directors in the busy warehouse training center. His militaristic demeanor now had a new function, instructing others on how to lead change instead of imposing obedience. "We're not here to ND or exert control," he reminded his trainees. "Our purpose is to lead others along the route we discovered and then assist them in doing the same." Updates from throughout their network were relayed to Maverick's morning meeting. Programs for community support were now managed by former adversaries. Veterans who had previously had difficulty finding meaning in life now guided others through similar changes. The transformation they had initiated had become self-sustaining. In a private moment, Maverick confessed to Ethan, "I catch myself sometimes, searching for the former myself, the person who believed that being strong meant frightening other people. He is no longer there." The day saw a constant flow of guests, including new participants beginning their adventure, community leaders looking for advice, and program graduates returning to share success stories. Every encounter demonstrated how their initial crisis response had developed into a long-lasting solution. As they watched Ethan teach a new participant the fundamentals of plumbing, Nina murmured to Samantha, "Your father. He now teaches differently, emphasizing the wisdom underlying the effort rather than the labor itself." Evidence of the maturity of their program surfaced during the day. The initial members of Crystal Lake have developed into independent leaders and mentors. Training sessions conducted by reformed members were held at the community center. Former Stormrunners now ran the youth program at the car business. As they watched the events of the day, Ethan informed Samantha that it was ready. "All set to stand alone." She began, "Because of you," but he shook his head. "Because of all of us, everyone who made the decision to change also made the decision to assist others in changing." Their progress was emphasized in Shadow's evening report. The network of assistance for veterans had evolved into a template for other communities. Organizations all throughout the nation were researching the rehabilitation strategy. A movement had developed from what had begun as a reaction to intimidation. "We no longer only fix broken things." Shadow watched. We're creating something that will last beyond our lifetimes. For its most recent batch of program directors, the Warehouse Training Center held a graduation ceremony. As Samantha gave the keynote talk, Ethan observed from the rear. Her statements conveyed both her own hard-won knowledge and the wisdom he had taught her. She informed the graduates that having authority over others is not a sign of true strength. It's in assisting them in discovering their own strength and the way to improve upon who they were. Original members, reformed participants, and new leaders, all a part of the legacy they had created together, gathered at Nina's diner as dusk drew near. The topics of discussion shifted from survival to expansion and the broader dissemination of their message of change. Do you recall when we believed that this was merely about resisting the Stormrunners? During a peaceful moment with Ethan, Maverick inquired. Take a look at us now. Demonstrating to others how to weather their own storms. Ethan put in extra hours at his shop. Plumbing repair is becoming less like work and more like meditation. He was reminded of the ideals they had applied to restore not just their town but also the lives of innumerable people by every tool, fitting, and connection. Samantha replied, "You're not really stepping back," as she discovered him there. "You're simply altering your leadership style. As you occasionally taught us, silent instruction has the greatest impact." As night fell over Crystal Lake, the lights in their network's residences and businesses remained bright. Each radiance signified not only a change in life but also a change in purpose, not merely recovery but true rebirth. At their last meeting of the day, Shadow stated that the program had proven itself. Without losing its heart, it develops, changes, and gets stronger. Ethan observed the interactions, heard the stories, and recognized the innate leadership in the people they had assisted. Their community's actual strength, its capacity to change not just individuals but entire generations, was exposed by the pressure that had once threatened to destroy it. He informed the audience that there would be fresh problems tomorrow. However, you now know how to deal with them. Together, not alone. Not by coercion, but by comprehension. By constructing, not by breaking. Their journey from crisis response to long-lasting change, from facing fear to educating others about true courage, was quietly celebrated as the evening came to a close. Crystal Lake has become into more than just a prosperous venture. It had turned into a lighthouse, demonstrating to others that change was achievable via the everyday decision to be better than oneself rather than by coercion or obligation. Ethan Steele stood at his shop window, watching the early sun paint the town in shades of gold, 1 year to the day since the Stormrunners first roared into Crystal Lake. Once resonating with the roar of menacing motorcycles, the streets now hummed with deliberate activity. However, their actual metamorphosis was not evident in the renovated companies or altered buildings. The people were the cause. Samantha put down her coffee and reported the year's final numbers. 38 satellite programs, 12 training facilities, and more than 500 successful transformations. Additionally, that is only the official count. They watched through the glass as Shadow led a fresh batch of veterans in morning drills. Instead being intimidating, his militaristic demeanor now inspired. Alongside him, Maverick helped ex-gang members transition, and his personal metamorphosis served as a living example of the effectiveness of their approach. Do you recall that initial morning? When they believed that fear was strength, Ethan asked in a low voice. It feels like a different lifetime. Samantha answered with the same serene assurance her father had always exuded in her leadership. Since then, we've all changed a lot. The Warehouse Training Center had developed into a community transformation hub for the region. Leaders from all throughout the nation gathered to learn about their approaches to true rebirth rather than rehabilitation. Their legacy was enhanced by each success story. Every life that was changed demonstrated the value of making a better decision. While serving coffee to a group of program grads, Nina remarked, "Your father. He had no desire to establish an empire. All he wanted to do was mend the shattered neighborhoods, people, and pipelines." Evidence of the impact of their adventure surfaced throughout the morning. Projects to improve the community were now directed by former Stormrunners. Veterans who had previously battled with purpose served as mentors to others during their transitions. With each generation passing on knowledge to the next, the cycle of change has become self-sustaining. At the leadership meeting that day, Shadow noted that it's no longer only about improving lives. The goal is to alter the way that strength is perceived. Crystal Lake was no longer merely a success tale. It served as a real-life illustration of how societies could change. Training programs on trade skills were held in the hardware store. Business education had been added to the auto shop's youth program. The town was filled with evidence of their progress. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we'd succeeded that first day," Maverick said quietly. "What if, like every other town, we had been able to terrify this one?" Then, Ethan said, "We would have missed the most crucial lesson. Making others fear you isn't your true power. It's in supporting their self-belief." A constant flow of people arrived in the afternoon, including new participants embarking on their own journeys, community leaders seeking advice, and program graduates sharing their success stories. Every encounter demonstrated how their initial crisis response had developed into long-lasting transformation. Officer Cooper told Ethan, "Your daughter," as he observed Samantha juggling many programs. "She does more than simply continue your task. She's taking it in unexpected directions." The group assembled at the center to celebrate their anniversary as nightfall drew near. Not to commemorate the day they defied intimidation, but to honor the progress they've made since. Stories of change, individual journeys, community revitalization, and lives restored filled the room. Shadow told the group, "We didn't just change ourselves. We altered people's perceptions of what is feasible and demonstrated that the most difficult path frequently leads to the most fulfilling goal." With his hands steady on familiar equipment, Ethan worked on one last repair job while the festivities went on. He was reminded of the values they had applied to reconstruct not only their community but also the lives of innumerable people with every fitting and connection. "Are you still repairing pipes?" Samantha's smile was sympathetic when she found him in the store. "Just like some things had to change, some things don't need to," he said. Crystal Lake was enveloped in darkness, but there was more than electric light in the town. Every house, company, and meeting spot glowed with the coziness of a purpose that had been changed. The darkness that had once endangered their society had turned into the most brilliant background for their light. "Look at them," Ethan murmured quietly as he observed the mix of newcomers and longtime members reminiscing at Nina's. "Look, everyone here is a symbol of someone who believed in something greater and decided to take a more difficult route." The celebration went to the warehouse training facility in the evening, where pictures of their journey from crisis to transformation were displayed on the walls. The most striking pictures, however, were not of programs being expanded or buildings being fixed, rather, they showed people's lives being changed and their purpose being rekindled. Samantha told a group of incoming program directors, "We're not just teaching them how to be different, we're showing them who they always could have been." 3 motorcycles arrived in town as the crowd was winding down, but rather than creating tension, they brought in new attendees who were enticed by tales of opportunity. Their engine's boom now signaled hope rather than danger. Shadow watched as the newcomers parked their bikes, making a full circle. "They're coming to find strength, not to prove it, though, this time." That evening, Ethan stood in the doorway of his shop for the final time, witnessing his daughter, reformed members, community leaders, and new participants all become a part of something greater than themselves. Their actual strength had been shown by the strain that had previously threatened to shatter them. "Dad, do you recall what you used to say about pressure?" Samantha joined him in the doorway, discussing how it shows the true materials of things. With a soft smile in the dusk light, Ethan nodded. "It turns out that people are like pipes in that if you press them too hard, they either shatter or reveal their true strength." Over Crystal Lake, the night grew darker, but darkness was no longer afraid. Their community had become more resilient than any intimidation and more powerful than any threat. They had created something that would last beyond all of them, not only a software or a technique, but a real-life example of the strength that comes from making the right decision. The ultimate measure of their accomplishment was found in that strength, not in the lives or communities they changed, but in the realization that true power comes from assisting others in discovering their true selves rather than in inciting fear. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss these if you liked this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.